Hello, everybody, and thanks for listening. Now, this is sort of like an off topic, or I guess you can say it sort of brings up the issues of accountability. And I mentioned that in a video about holding employers accountable to some of these law breaking issues when it comes to illegal status here in American government and in American society. And so I'm going to be really brutally honest and say that I feel a lot of people have not been held accountable for turning a blind eye to what has been going on here in America in terms of some of the quote unquote sanctuary cities. Now, I guess, how would I say this? I don't feel like it's right or fair to be cruel to people who really are in need, and if they need help, opening your doors and helping people who really need help. And if they're really trying to do the right things for the right reasons, if they're trying to look for a job, if they're seeking better education, better housing. But we have American citizens here that are in need of those same issues. And the big fight is a lot of competition among social groups or ethnic groups. And I really feel like a blind eye has been turned, and I feel like it's easy to turn backs and eyes on the black community for some people because there's so much racism. And I feel like racism has evolved now. It's where people won't call you the N-word. They won't do the things that they did in the South and in the 50s, 60s. They don't have the signs saying, you know, you inners get out. You know, the brutal context of racism and hatred. It's still here in America, but it's just dressed up and it's fancier and it's disguised. You know, we as Americans, people of color that are Americans, still feel discriminated by employers when you don't get paid the same pay as your coworker simply because of the color of your skin or your gender. You are not treated the same way, or it takes you longer to complete a program to get promoted to a higher level to make more income. And all of the people that are hired first are usually people of lighter complexion or white skin, or they look to be white, or they're Hispanic that look like they're more white. And I know that I'm not the only one that has seen this. Now, I'll be really, really brutally honest when I say this, but I know recently when I went to the South, what I did notice about the South, despite all of the craziness, you know, people are really honest. They come out and say what it is that they gotta say. You know, it's up close and personal. It's in your face. You know your place. But when you're in the city, people hide and they finagle and they patronize in a way where they act as though they like you, but they really don't. They hate you because of skin color or race, or they treat you in a way where it's unfair, and you don't get treated fairly. You get treated in a way where they pretend as though they're treating you fair. They really aren't treating you fair. They're treating someone else the way you should also be treated. So you're getting lesser pay, you're being told, okay, good job, but they hired someone else in your position. You go to school and you've got all this education as a person of color, but you don't get recognized as your coworker does because they happen to not be black. Um, we'll get told oftentimes, well, if you take this test, you can pass this test and you can pass that test and you'll get promoted and you'll make more pay. And then as soon as you pass that test, by the time you do pass it, when you pass that test or that exam, a new test pops up. When you're ready to get that higher paying position and you're ready to be promoted, somehow that what you thought was a finish line, you thought you've crossed it, it's been pushed further away from you. And I know that I'm not the only one that has experienced this or has witnessed that kind of treatment. That happens in the workplace a lot to people of color. And if you do at some of these schools, now I'm gonna hold not only the employers, but I think people need to be aware that some of these schools, well, I'm not going to even say some of them, most of these schools perpetuate racism, and they teach it to the kids early. And it's subtle, where they treat, like if a black child does something wrong or does something that is perceived to be wrong, like maybe they're out of their seat when they're not supposed to, or they do something out of turn, they're screamed at and treated with great aggression and force, and rules have to be followed, and right away they're on it when it comes to the disciplinary actions of children of color. But when it's children who are not black or who are perceived to be white or white status or whatever that isn't black, they could do the same thing, or they could be, acting up, kicking, screaming, fighting, cussing, but they're not met with that same aggression as quickly as their classmate, the one whom's black. Now, what I have witnessed in some of these school systems is that when a child acts out, if that child is of color, and this is not talked about, if they act out, and it could be one time, they start screaming, hollering, and they get in trouble, or they do something that is perceived to be out of turn, right away notes are written, parents are called, and if it seems as it's an issue where it's fighting, right away they want to put that kid in a special education class, or they want to move that kid to a school where it's all children that have behavior issues. They don't want to deal with that black kid. And it could be a simple situation that can be talked about with the parents, but they choose not to, or they don't disclose the same information that they do to parents who are not black that they do parents that are black. Everything is pretty much quick, fast. They don't have a lot of interaction in terms of parents of color. It's more, let's just do this meeting, let's talk about this, and it's sort of A-B thing. But when it's a child that is not black and the parents are not black, they ask them for a personal meeting, they want to go to their house, they get involved with the families. And so I've witnessed some of this stuff happen, and nobody says anything about it. And I think it's a huge problem here, especially in California. There's a lot of schools, and you'll have a lot of the public schools who have a lot of the low income students, or students that their parents don't make as much money or whatever the issues are. And then the private schools have parents who maybe they make a little more money, and or they just don't want their kids going to school with Hispanics and blacks and children of color. And so I have witnessed these issues, and I don't think it's talked about enough, and it happens a lot here in California. And I've personally witnessed these issues, and they happen a lot, and it's sad. And a lot of times the parents don't realize that this is going on. And you'll find that a lot of these schools, too, I've always questioned this. They make priorities and they make provisions for the Hispanic parents that don't speak English to learn English. But people who want to learn Spanish, there are no free Spanish courses for you to learn to converse with people that speak Spanish. But there are free courses if you want to learn to speak English, so that's another get free pass. And so I think that's a problem. I feel like if you're going to treat one group one way, you need to treat everybody the same way. If you're going to be open and kind-hearted to one group, then do it to all. And I don't see that with the parents and the children of color as much. You know, they don't give them an invitation. Well, you know, we have some classes where you can learn beginner Spanish. You know, we have a large Spanish population, and you know, we have had issues where some parents feel like if they don't understand the conversation that they're not being inclusive of these other parents when they have meetings. And so we want to try to extend some beginners courses, you know, to welcome people to learn a new language. That's for those who are interested, of course. Now, I'm not saying that that's something that has to be implemented, but it would be nice if it was offered to those who were interested. And it isn't. There's also a lot of involvement with the Hispanic community families when there's PTA and certain groups that meet at some of these schools, but you don't see any parents of color. And I'm not going to say that they're not included. I'm going to say that they're not involved enough. And I feel like there's parents that are of color who aren't involved in their school that they send their kids to. They just sort of send their kids anticipating that the kid is getting treated well and that the kid's got a place to go to school while they work. And some parents, I understand, they're busy and they have a lot going on, but you really need to get involved with what is going on in your child's learning in the schools. Because if you don't know what's going on and how they're being treated, if they're young, they can't really converse to you and say what's really going on. When they're older, of course, they can come to you and say, well, this teacher's not treating me fair, or I feel she's not treating or he's not treating me fair. But what about the children that are younger, school-age kids, or even younger? If they're not being treated well, you wouldn't know. All you know is that you get a report from that teacher, well, Billy wasn't behaving, or Trayvon wasn't behaving, or Marcus wasn't behaving, or Julie wasn't sitting down, or Janice didn't read her homework, you know, in front of the class. She refused. You know, maybe my name thing is off, but you get my picture. Is what I'm saying is that if you are not involved with your kids' schooling and activities and what's going on, even if you go one time, you know, to the parent teacher, or if you call on the phone, or even if you couldn't make it, if you just call up there to find out what's going on, or ask your child, see what their behaviorism is at home, how they react. Were they happy when they came home? Sad? Did they act like they're afraid? to be touched, you should question all of that. So I feel like not enough interaction is being done in the schools with children of color today, especially here in these sanctuary quote unquote cities. And there's favoritism going on even in the workplace with people, where they'll all of these establishments will have people that rarely only see maybe one or two. You can count on one hand how many people are black working there. And I don't feel that's by accident. And if you go to some of these schools, you don't see that many black teachers anymore. And so I don't know if anybody has brought these issues out. Maybe they have, or maybe not enough. Maybe it's not even really focused on enough. But there's not enough black teachers in these schools, and that's not by accident. It's because they don't want you teaching their kids. And some of them will tell you they don't want you, a person of color, teaching their kids. They want a white person teaching their kids, or they want a Hispanic teacher teaching their kids. And always the excuse is, well, my kid didn't speak English when they came, so I want somebody that can speak both languages. And a lot of times these jobs will discriminate based on what language you do or do not speak. They'll say a lot of times when we get these applications, now black people, do you feel me on this one, when I say that you'll get an application when you're applying for these jobs and it'll say bilingual preferred. And I feel that a lot of times they'll use that to say, well, we have a large population of people who speak a particular language other than English, so we want somebody that can accommodate everyone all across the board. Okay, well then you hire somebody that can speak Spanish, but you need to also hire English speakers as well. But they don't look at it like that. No, it's, you get this application, you fill it out, it says bilingual preferred. And this is not only Hispanic, this can happen with other groups that come here to speak another language. Now, I understand if you have people coming from some part of Asia and you need an interpreter, somebody that can speak Mandarin. If you have a particular group, so they know that they can talk to somebody that can speak in Mandarin, but you also still have English speakers. So could you hire English speakers and a person or two people or more that speak Mandarin, and that some people that speak Spanish? Don't just say bilingual preferred and you don't hire any English speakers, and then you only hire English speakers that are white, and you don't hire blacks, and then you only hire people that look like they aren't of color at all. They're just white people or people that aren't black. And so I've seen this happen a lot, and I'm gonna say this, I'll be honest when I say this happens a lot in these sanctuary cities. So that's where some people are getting really riled up about the unfairness that has been going on. And so we've been seeing this, but see, nobody says anything. They keep quiet and they keep a hushed mouth. And I was always told if you keep a closed mouth, it doesn't get fed. So I feel like people need to come out and be more honest and be more vocal about the things that they've witnessed that feels like it's actually reverse racism, where you have this group saying, oh, it's racist to take away DACA, and it's racist to bring up all of these rules. But think about it. Here you have people who have born and raised here. They've been through racism simply because of the color of their skin. They can't get hired anywhere because they don't speak another language. Here you've been here all your life, and because you don't speak another language, now you can't get a job because they prefer this other group over you. And some of that is not because of the language, it's because you happen to be black. So let's just be honest here. And I know this doesn't sound nice to everybody and it doesn't appeal to everyone, but it's the truth. And so we send our kids to these schools in hope that these teachers are teaching our kids, and they only teach the kids that they want to teach. And the kids they don't want to teach, if they're kids that are really catching on and they're bright, they're going to learn through all the obstacles. But how are they really being treated by these teachers? Do we could say the same thing? What do we know if they're really teaching our kids the right way? If they're really getting our kids to learn, or are they focusing more on the kids that look like them? You know, what is the history like? What are our black kids learning about in history? So we won't even go into that one. That's a whole probably 10 videos. Because they're not learning about their history. If they learn, it's always the surface stuff, like Dr. Martin Luther King, maybe Oprah, stuff like that. And it's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. But here's another thing, the celebrations. Schools, I remember, used to celebrate Black History Month, and they used to do programs and the parties. They don't do that in these schools, in these sanctuary cities anymore. You know what parties and celebrations happen that are huge? It's always Cinco de Mayo and all of the Hispanic parties. Those are the biggest celebrated holidays, and organizations, little groups and stuff. They make food and potlucks and things like that, and everybody's excited, and they do dancing and all this stuff. Used to be they would do that for Black History Month, and they would have like poems, and then they would talk about the history, and then they would talk about positive things, advancements. You don't get that as much in these schools anymore. They barely even talk about it, and if they do, it's something boring and dead. And you hear the same stuff year after year after year with no enthusiasm in sight. And so it's not encouraging to the black students that are there. And it's not by accident. I'm going to say this again. So I just thought that I should bring these things out. So it's not only just in the workplace and just in the environments, but you can feel this stinging racism where you're ignored because you're a person of color. You don't count. You don't matter. So that's probably where that whole thing came up. Black Lives Matter, which you got black people, some of them, that don't even like that because they attributed it to, these particular individuals. Okay, what they do with their life is one thing, but the truth of the matter is that they don't really matter to certain people. We've seen that. We've seen that in Virginia. We've seen that in some of these places where, like when they had the same issue happen in Louisiana, in the French Quarters, and in those places where they had a catastrophe, people were left to almost die. Maybe some of them, a majority of them didn't. I don't even think they really fully recovered. But now we've got this thing in Texas here, okay? It's similar. It was horrible. But you notice they hurried up on that. Now, I didn't really see as many black people, but there were black people who were struggling. But they highlighted the white people. You had to feel sympathy and empathy and everything, all of the above. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. You should. You should feel for people who are struggling, because this could happen anywhere to anyone. There could be an earthquake, there could be a hurricane, there could be a horrible storm, could wipe everything out, and then all you've got is each other. But people don't seem to learn that until a disaster strikes. When there are issues like in these cities that we have, people are all about themselves. They don't think about, okay, I'm a minority group, let me support other minority groups. No, they want you to support them, and then they just turn a blind eye on you because they have their biases. So what I'm saying is that there has been racism, there has been social divisions and divides among Hispanic and black community in these sanctuary cities, not only based on jobs, but also just skin color alone. There have been people that have come from other countries, they look black, and they are. I'll just be honest with you. They are. But they would classify themselves as other. Or I'm really Latin. Or I'm Afro-Black. Or Afro-Latin. They don't want to be considered black because of the negative connotation behind it, because of all of the racism and the stereotyping that has happened here in America. they've read about that, or they've heard about it, or they've heard through other people, or they see how people have treated them in their country. So they come here feeling like, I'm just going to side with these people, because if we look, or we can pass for something else, then maybe we'll be better than the ones that are here in the States. And so this has happened. You'll have other black people who come from another country, and they might have an admixture of some other culture or some other nationality. And instead of them admittedly saying, yeah, we are a part of the black community, no, we're not black. And so we're also met with the hatred of that here in the States. And so I don't think people talk about this enough, and it's sad. And so this is the kind of thing that upsets people and fuels these type of debates of discord, because people don't want to support something that doesn't support us. And so we felt that all along. Just don't talk about it. Just stay quiet about it. Just accept it. But you know what? Enough of accepting lies. The truth is that if you don't support other people, then what would make you think that we need to support you when you're turning a blind eye to our needs and our issues, our debates, our fights? When there's something that happens to black people, certain folks will come forward and be bold enough to say, I may not be black, but I see the wrong in this that's being done to the people of color. And I'm in support of doing what's right. But then you have other people who they look at it as I'm all for only people that look like me. And so they look at it as a competition thing. So they think, oh, I'm in competition for housing. I'm in competition for education. They're going to hire me over this black person because I'm not black, or I look like I'm not black. And so these people, that's a benefit to them. And so I think not enough is being said about that. And it happens in these schools early, where they're teaching kids subtly. I treat this kid one way and treat the other kids another way. We'll write this kid up and we'll let this kid go. We'll give this kid a couple of chances before we send this kid off. This kid, we're not giving him a chance. So these are the type of things that people don't talk about. And so I brought those things out. I thought those things were important. I feel like parents, you need to ask questions. Find out. Even if you got to drop in, there's no harm in dropping into your school and watching and observing in your classroom, even if it's for 20 minutes. Don't even call the teacher and let them know you're coming, so you can see what's going on in these classrooms and how these teachers are treating your children. Are they being fair? And then it's not only just seeing, sometimes it's what's written, what's being told to you. And then at the end of the school year, has your kid learned anything? Do you see a change in their, improvement in reading and math? Or does it seem like it's worse? They just pass them on because they don't want to deal with the headaches. So that's the way they're not going to tell you this, but that's what it is. And so they pass them on to the next grade so it could be some other teacher's headache. Because that's the way they view it. Those teachers that are like that. They view it as, oh, it's somebody else's headache. Let them deal with it. I'm just glad I don't have to deal with those parents. So I just think that people need to evaluate what kinds of things are going on in some of these schools in these sanctuary cities. So how are the kids being treated? How are kids of color being treated in these schools? And I'm talking about these low-income schools as well. Primarily is what I'm talking about, because a lot of these schools have still a population of black students, but some kids excel and some kids need more help than others. So I think those things are not talked about as much. There's a lot of issues that are in question around government, but these schools also need to be held accountable at how they talk about treating people fairly. They mention all these little slogans and things like that, but are they really following it? And a lot of times they aren't. The black kid is sort of ostracized, or they're not included in certain activities, or they're looked at differently than the other kid. There are teachers that are like that, and I'm just going to put that out there. Let's not lie about these things. This is happening. And so if you ever question as to why your kid is not passing the test, why they're not being able to pass on, or they're passed on and they still haven't learned anything, you might want to ask, what teachers, think about all the teachers they've had. So I thought those were important issues to bring out. Thanks for listening.